Hello and welcome to Your Employment Matters. I'm Beverly Williams and I'm here to help you navigate your career. This is for anyone who's searching for their dream job or promotion, or perhaps you're just looking to hang on to the job you have. Today's work environments are multi-generational, multi-religious, multinational, multiracial, and multi-gender identity. Add market disruptors like Amazon and Lyft, along with the addition of AI, and it's easy to see why finding and keeping a job is such a challenge. Employment success and even employment survival depend on your ability to adapt. That's why my goal for this 30-minute podcast is to first advocate embracing change and differences, and second, to encourage you to proactively assume responsibility for your career. Get your work week off to a good start by listening to Your Employment Matters every Monday. Find out how to own your career and get the best practices for making your employment matter. Well, today we're going to talk about entrepreneurial endeavors, being an entrepreneur and what that means. Let's start by defining entrepreneur. As my goddaughter told me, when you want to know something, godmother, go to the Google. So I Googled entrepreneur, and this is what I found. An entrepreneur is a person who organizes and operates a business or businesses, taking on greater than normal financial risks in order to do so. A person who starts a business and is willing to risk loss in order to make money, one who organizes, manages, and assumes the risks of a business or enterprise. Now, according to one website, it's called The Balance Small Business. I think the name of the website is The Balance, and small business is a special subsection of that website. It identifies characteristics of a successful entrepreneur. And these characteristics, just to name a few, because obviously there are more, include passion, independent thinking, optimism, confidence, tenacity, and vision. Now, as I said, that's not a comprehensive list, but that's an indication of just several of the very important characteristics successful entrepreneurs tend to have. There are also different types of entrepreneurs, including small business owners, home-based and online businesses, lifestyle entrepreneurs, inventors, and serial entrepreneurs. Now, while it may be simple to establish a business because it's nothing more than filing the appropriate forms with typically a state agency to establish a business, even being an unsuccessful entrepreneur takes work. There are things that you have to do on a daily basis. And even if you have some of the characteristics that I enumerated, you may not be successful, but you may be working hard, and you may not be working in furtherance of your goals and objectives, at least those that you think you have established and are focused on. Now, don't misunderstand, although it's easy to establish a business, being a successful business person, a successful entrepreneur takes planning, hard work, it takes research, it takes attention to detail. It takes so many things that perhaps people don't readily know of. And quite frankly, maybe some people who want to become entrepreneurs aren't prepared to do. Now, some of the steps involved in becoming an entrepreneur is being focused on the development of those entrepreneurial characteristics that I identified earlier: tenacity, independent thinking, passion. The other thing is you got to have a good idea, if not a great idea, that people are willing to pay for. Detail, attention to detail, and a detailed plan for success are essential. Finally, consistent execution and dedication to that plan. My guest today is Shawn Khorrami, who is a serial entrepreneur. Shawn's experience, in my opinion, is not only unique, it's inspirational as well as aspirational. Welcome, Shawn. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule today to tell us about your employment journey.
Hi, Beverly. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, just so you know, listeners, Shawn and I met virtually last week. Before that, I didn't know him. I still don't know him. I hadn't met him. But when I heard his story, at least part of it, because there were other people involved in our discussion, I was struck by something he said. And I said, I've never heard that before. And I hazard a guess that many other people had not heard that before. And I realized that Shawn's employment journey, the path he selected for himself, was unique. And it might be beneficial for people who are uncertain about how to move forward with their careers, with their employment. It might be beneficial to hear from Shawn. So, Shawn, why don't you tell us about your employment journey and your entrepreneurial experiences? And please, please don't leave out your resume experience.
Well, I guess we'll get to that with respect to my resume because that's kind of interesting to me. But I always, from the time I was a little kid, my father was an entrepreneur. We're immigrants. We moved here from Iran, and my father had his own construction business, and he had, he would build roads, bridges, buildings, and as a 6, 7, 8, 9 year old kid getting to go to these construction sites and actually climbing over some of the equipment, bulldozers, and getting in there, very exciting for a little kid. And so I always wanted to get into that business, obviously. And that desire to get into that business extended well into my teens. Ultimately, by the way, I never got into the construction business. It's funny because I was listening to another entrepreneur who said he would never, ever, he never thought he'd ever get into his father's business. And his father's business was an insurance business. And you can understand why, or a lot of us do. But he ended up actually getting into his father's business and actually growing it into a big national company. But, it's weird how that happens. And you think you're going to do one thing and you end up not. But anyway, getting into my teens, I still wanted to get into construction. And we had moved over to the US. My father was never able to sort of grow his business to the same level because, believe it or not, if you move countries when you're in your 40s at the time that he was well into his 40s, it's difficult to recreate your career in a whole new place. But anyway, he managed to get his hands on a couple of small income properties, but he was having a lot of trouble managing them because at that time, it didn't make sense to get a professional management company, didn't make financial sense. He was not equipped to really manage that kind of a business. And at the time, there were personal computers were getting into homes, and I was able to put together a little database program to help him and help him manage these couple of properties. But what I also did was I started going to his friends who were in the same boat and saying, okay, I can help with this stuff. So I made a little business out of it. And that was when I was in my teens. I, however, always believed in formal education. I don't necessarily believe that that's the right path for everybody. But for me, I love that kind of very focused and almost cramming of information into your brain that happens when you go to school. So I spun off that business. I went into college. I stayed there for quite a while. A lot of times I say it's because I was lazy. I liked the college life. I got a degree in mathematics, another one in computers, and I sort of backed into a third degree, which was economics. I had taken so many electives in that area that it only, it was not that much more for me to go get an actual degree in it. I applied for more units. I stayed in. So I got a degree in economics. I then went and got a degree in law. I also, while I don't have degrees in them, I went on to have a lot of formal education in marketing, sales, and accounting. So, but during that entire time, I had friends and colleagues, well, not colleagues, schoolmates, really, right? That were looking at, okay, what industry do I get into? What company do I apply to? How do I do my resume? You mentioned resume, all this stuff. It was never a thought in my mind. I mean, in my mind, I was going to go do my own thing. I was going to go start something. I don't know why I thought that way, but that's the way I thought. It was not really interesting to me to go and work at some company. It didn't, for whatever reason, it just did not seem to have. I didn't have. You mentioned the word passion. I didn't have much passion for it. I didn't have much understanding of that thing. To me, my mind, the way it works is I have to understand entirety of things, and so it just for whatever reason it didn't click for me, and that's why I never did that, and I never did a resume. And recently I was talking to my wife. It was something that dawned on me. I said, I've never ever done a resume. I don't have one. I've done bios, I've done things like that, but I don't know what a resume for me would even look like.
That's amazing. You have no idea. When I heard that, my jaw dropped.
Yeah.
Okay. I've never heard anyone say that before.
I found that that's unusual.
It is.
I've never received a W-2 from a company I haven't owned, or had, significant ownership interest in.
That's amazing. You are amazing, Shawn.
No, I don't equate it to that. It's just it's funny because here's something that I realized not too long ago, which my wife has worked with me for many years, off and on. And she would tell me things like, "Oh, well, no, your employees aren't going to understand X, Y, and Z, or they're not going to like to do, A, B, and C." And I never understood those things until kind of recently, where I actually, really put this in my head together, because I never have put that together. Saying I've never had that employee experience. What it means to have a direct boss, right? We all have bosses, right? I have investors, I have, lenders, things like that, and I don't refer to them as bosses necessarily, but look, you have to, give them a voice in things, and they actually have a say in things, you know. But I've never had that direct boss where, they say, okay, now go do this. Now there's this project we got to move forward. Now this is your part in some other project. I've never done that. And I've never been in that situation where, someone says something, I find it intimidating. So talking to an employee, I know how I talk to an employee. I don't know how it feels, how it's received from the other side,
Well,
right?
have you had any feedback before your wife?
I,
Did
I,
did you? I mean,
I went through.
you seem like a, from what I could discern, an observant person, a person that's empathetic. Did you see an expression on an employee's face or body language that said made you think, "Oh, did I? What happened? Did I
Well,
say
over time, what I've done is I've also, as part of, I don't call it formal education. I've had years of leadership training, going through various courses of that sort. But it does take a lot of thought to actually put yourself in that situation, and it's very difficult. And so a lot of times, even though, in other facets of life, I'm very much into what are the different perspectives that
something?"
people think, where do they come from, how are they seeing things, right? And I always have tried to put that into how I am inside the employment situation. But I do think that, there is a great deal of value to walking in another person's shoes. And that, literally, that thing of walking in someone else's shoes, when it comes to that employment setting, that I haven't done. And so, to the extent I lack perspective, I found that it mostly comes from that. It's not from a lack of trying. I really have. But, at the same time, when you haven't walked in another person's shoes, sometimes you don't see certain things. But it's something that I do concentrate on. I have concentrated on greatly. You know, But it took my wife sort of repeating it to me to say, no, you don't understand. When something comes out of your mouth to your employee, regardless of how you want to be perceived, regardless of what you want to say, there is an impression there that is that boss employee type relationship that you really need to be mindful of. And for me, for example, I'm the type that says, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Because I'm very, very much into, hey, look, I really want to get the best product. My point is getting the best product. I'm part of the team here, right? So I want you guys to speak frankly and tell me this and that, because that's the only way we get to the best result, in my mind, at least.
And what response do you usually get?
Well, I get the response is good, except that I think it still is tainted by this thing of, can I say no to this person? Can I say, hey,
Or
you're
can I be
wrong?
candid?
Right?
Can I be candid? Can I be
Exactly.
honest?
And I tend to have a very strong personality. I'm a type A person. This came up a number of years ago where we were getting into a conference room, okay, and it was a big meeting, and somebody said, "Oh, do you want to sit at the head of the table?" And I said to the person, "Why?" He said, "Well, you're the owner of the company. You're the boss. You get the head of the table." And I kind of chuckled. It was tongue in cheek, and I know it comes off arrogant, but I said, "Oh, the head of the table is wherever I sit." Um, okay. I said, I don't care where physically I'm sitting, wherever I sit is the head of the table. But
No, you're right.
well, it's obnoxious. But I was making an obnoxious joke. But I do have a strong personality, and some of those things that you mentioned when you looked up the definition of an entrepreneur, with confidence, things like that. I don't know if it's confidence or not, but it is a strong personality, and everything is a gift and a curse. I always say that everything is a gift and a curse. And the curse side of that is that when you have that type of a thing, you tend to be sometimes overwhelming. There's all kinds of negatives that come with that. And as a boss, while that may be in some people's minds a requirement to being the boss or being the owner or being the entrepreneur, as an employer, it may not come off as the best trait all the time. And you have to be incredibly careful. Putting aside laws, putting aside all of those things, it's for two reasons. One is just general respect and giving people the importance that they have in life. And two is to get the best result. I mentioned that before. But going back to respect, I don't think that being an entrepreneur, being a boss or anything is particularly makes one person better than another. It's the different journeys that you take. Some people, like I mentioned my friends, right? That, and classmates that wanted to go and work in a company, and I didn't have any interest in that. That doesn't make them worse than me. And frankly, a lot of them have been humongously successful in all kinds of facets of life. It's just a different way of being. And I don't think that in that setting of employer employee, that defines who people are. So having respect for your employees, your subordinates, is just as important as them having respect for you. And I think it's something that's required. And so sometimes when you have an overpowering personality, or you're very much a type A personality, that gets missed, and sometimes you come off disrespectful, even if when you're not meaning to. So it has to be something you work at all the time, every
Or
day.
arrogant. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
as a type A personality myself, some of the things you're talking about, I've heard. Yes.
Yeah. You can come off.
And that's not intended, but there's a certain level of self-confidence that it's just almost part of the DNA. And sometimes my grandmother used to say, you speak with authority. I mean, and I was like 10.
Right.
It's just who I am.
Yeah. And that's who you are, and you have your confidence, but at the same time, you got to be careful that doesn't, even though you don't feel that way, and you don't feel like arrogant, you want to make sure you also don't give the impression of, because after all,
Well, you're right.
how you're perceived is just as important as how you are.
You're absolutely right. But it takes time to, I think, to realize that,
Yeah, it does.
and over time, you, I've seen people's reactions to what I've said, similar to what you said about wherever I sit is the head of the table. I've
Yeah.
seen the look on people's faces when I've said something like that.
Yeah.
And I realized, so, then I self correct.
Yeah. Yeah, you just have to be very careful that you're not perceived that way, and particularly that now aside from showing people the respect that they deserve, because everyone does, then what happens is that can translate into, as a business concept, a downturn in productivity. You're not going to be, your group is not going to be as productive. Your team is not going to be as much of a team as you need, and your success rate is going to suffer for it. So, as a business concept, then you start having negatives come from that. So that's something, for example, that I work on daily, every day. Even before I got on this program with you, I had 2 meetings with different groups in my company, and I was a little bit upset at both of the teams, and I had to make sure that the way that I present my point of view does not come off as arrogant, does not come off as disrespectful, and does not hamper their productivity. And that's a challenge. It's a daily,
Yeah.
hourly challenge.
Leading is not easy.
No.
People who want to be leaders, they need to learn. They really need to learn. It's not easy. It's not as easy as it may seem. It's not. I don't know that it seems easy to everyone, but it may seem easy to some. Leading a team is not easy.
And particularly if you're dealing with small businesses and medium-sized businesses, those become a lot more challenging in different ways. And so I've been inside of entire industries that are like that, where you have to be very careful at dealing with other business owners within the industry, because when you deal with small and medium-sized businesses, sometimes it's a lack of sophistication, but other times it's also where it's more emotional. You're dealing with more emotional decision makers at times, and so you have to be mindful of those things, even dealing with your competitors, even dealing with your colleagues that are not necessarily inside of your sphere and your particular company, because you're also operating within an industry always. No matter what you think, you're always within an industry. And so in order to become one of the leaders within an industry, you have to do all of those same things, and none of those people are your employees. So it's important to take these things not only just with your employees but also with your colleagues.
Mm. Well, other than your wife, What, who do you go to when you need advice, or if you've made a mistake, if there's something hasn't worked out? Who's your go-to person, or do you have what do they call it, a kitchen cabinet that you talk to?
Well, sometimes I go to just family, and I talk to family members. They're different people that I seek different advice from. Believe it or not, my daughters, they tend to be incredibly candid, a word you mentioned, and sometimes it's hurtful, but at least I know that they're not speaking out of
It comes from
fear.
love. Comes from love. As a daughter, I've had to have some of those conversations. It comes
Yeah.
from love, always from love.
Yeah, and so there's that kind of a thing, and there's also I always seek mentors, regardless of anything, only because of just being able to get some level of perspective that I feel is being given to me in a relatively honest way, without the filters that a lot of people have when they speak to me. But other than that, Beverly, part of the problem is that, you got to act. Ultimately, I keep going back to this gift and a curse, right? I am not afraid of acting and pushing things forward and seeing how they turn out. And sometimes that means that I've made the wrong decision, and I'm going to have to deal with a lot of fallout from it. Sometimes they just go really well. hopefully on balance, they have gone extremely well, but that doesn't mean you don't have failures and things don't go wrong. But I try to get some sort of mentorship at all levels.
You know, I didn't always have a mentor. Fortunately, as my career progressed, I did identify some. And sometimes people come into your life. I didn't recognize a person as a mentor. I was about to leave. I resigned from a job and I wanted to tell my boss what I thought of him.
Uh-huh.
And his administrative assistant, it's like she read my mind. And she said, I know what you're thinking about doing, and I'm telling you, don't do it.
Uh-huh.
You don't burn bridges. And for some reason, because I'm not one who always listens to people, advice people give me, for some reason, I listened to her. And I left in a very respectful way, obviously more respectful than I had planned. And about 7 years later, my former supervisor reached out to me and offered me a job that changed the trajectory of my career and put me in a different salary, substantially different salary range. So, mentors are not always recognizable. I guess that's the way to say it.
Right.
But it's nice to have a formal one, your go-to person when you're confronted with something that you're not sure of or you don't know what to do. You can get other opinions that you respect because there's a certain degree of reliability of success from your perspective because success looks different to different people, I think.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned is when you said mentor, it can be mentors,
Yes,
plural.
and they
You know,
need to
I
be.
I have I have different people I talk to for different reasons. So I go to mentorship to different sources, and sometimes, by the way, I form boards that actually are meant for that reason. A little bit, there's advisory boards you can form. There's all kinds of things that you can do in order to provide yourself with some different perspective while at the same time insulating some of your decisions. There's a lot of purposes for different things. Yeah, just be careful when you're in my mind, when one is looking out for mentors, it doesn't have to be the same person every time.
No, and I do that with friends too. I have friends I go to when I'm angry and I just want somebody to agree with me. And then there are friends that I go to because they're level-headed and I know they'll be able to talk me down if I need to be talked down. They'll tell me if I'm wrong. And then there are friends that will say, it's going to be all right. Don't worry. I have an eclectic group of friends and it's like a mentor. You need to
Yes.
know who to go to get what you need, not what you necessarily want to hear, but what you need to hear.
Yes. You know, Another thing is that you again, it's something you mentioned, and I really like that you did that. You talked about how you didn't actually confront your boss, and you didn't actually say the things that you wanted to say. Some of those things may have been out of anger and not productive, but it's also part of what I was saying. It feeds into exactly that, where your boss is not getting proper feedback in that situation in order to correct a behavior that may be inappropriate, or at least come to you and say, well, yeah, I understand you took that as inappropriate. It may be something that you misunderstood, right? And having an explanation given to you where you don't feel so bad about the exchange, about the relationship. It may actually fix things with how you feel about it. So in a lot of ways, that lack of feedback that doesn't exist a lot of times, going from employee to employer, is crucial, and it's a problem. Now, some organizations, again, we've tried this in various companies that I've run, is trying to get some form of feedback from employees that starts from sort of doing anonymous type things, sort of like suggestion box type things, but putting together a system where employees can actually give proper feedback feeling comfortable that they're at least not going to be retaliated against can be a way of getting that kind of a thing where the employer starts understanding how to deal with its employees, where the employee at least feels that they're not being treated properly, or they need something better, or they need certain tools. You know, it's incredibly important, and organizations over time have increased the amount of what they've done with that. You know, there used to be a thing of, hey, I'm hiring you. You just come in and you do whatever I tell you to do. And a lot of employees want to do a really great job, and they want to be productive, and they want to make things happen. It's a feeling of accomplishment. But way back when, organizations weren't very good at providing the employees with the tools they need to do that. That starts with training, or even, providing proper pens, for example, at one point, right?
Sure.
Those things are things that organizations have realized, hey, look, we need that feedback from employees, because people don't get into a job. They don't want to be there every day and just create failure. They want to themselves be successful. They want to be acknowledged, and they want to do a good job. So when you're hiring people and you're getting people that actually want to do a good job, sometimes when that doesn't work, it may be you as the employer. It may be your fault that they're not doing well, because you're not providing them with the tools, with the information, with the training that they need in order to be successful, and in turn make you successful. So it's very, very important as employers that you have the voice of your employees heard, and you hear them actually and respond properly.
And there's a word you use, retaliation. In my experience, employees are afraid of retaliation. They're rarely candid, even when there is an online survey conducted, because they don't trust. There's a lack of trust. There's a fear that they'll lose their jobs. And that's unfortunate, because you're right. Supervisors, companies, businesses need feedback so that they can improve their business. They can improve their productivity. They can improve their selection of leaders. Without that constructive input, they're not going to be able to do that as well as they would otherwise.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that online anonymous thing. The part of the thinking is that there's no way I can be anonymous. There's no
Exactly.
way I can do that. And if I cannot be anonymous, then I'm not going to make a comment.
It's not an honest one.
Exactly. And so these are huge challenges that people don't actually, really think through, especially small businesses. A lot of times what I notice is that thought hasn't gone into that. And so you have a group of 50 employees, 100 employees that really don't have any way of communicating very productive, frankly, very productive information to the employer that would really help in the employer's business, okay,
Yes.
altogether, in having a successful business, is not getting communicated from the employee to the employer. That is a very big challenge, and it's an area where organizations and companies can hugely benefit. For example, you have employees that are talking to your customers. A lot of business owners don't take the time to actually talk to their customers, especially once they get employees that do that. Let's assume, that that's the case. The people that are on the ground talking to customers, hearing from them and actually hearing their pain and trying to address them, those people have some very, very valuable input. That input cannot be hampered down because of the employee-employer relationship, because it hurts the business above anything else. Forget everything else. Forget the fact that employees have to be satisfied with their work. Forget that you want to give people respect. Forget all of those things. What about your business?
Yeah.
And so that information that comes where you learn about your customer is incredibly important.
What I think is that sometimes it's helpful to have a middle person, maybe an employee relations person that the employee can talk to, but there would have to be trust built, because if the employee relations person works for the company, it's going to be seen as a company person. and there won't be the trust necessary for the employee to be candid.
Yeah. Having an employee advocate of sorts is, it has, again, all of these things have to be done right, because every time you and I are talking about it, where do we go back to? To that trust.
Right.
Can I be candid? Okay. And,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to risk their job over that. No one wants to risk their career. Think about it. In your situation that you described, you talked to the executive assistant, and the thought process wasn't even for that job and for that moment. It was for the years to come, for your entire career. And so when you're, as an employee, you're thinking through that kind of situation where it can have such long lasting effect. Are you likely to be candid? No, it's not likely. And frankly, even when you are candid, you're going to hold back.
Well, that's not you. You need to be thoughtful about what you're saying and how you're saying it. My other problem was tone. I'm the oldest of three children, but my father is loud. My brothers are loud.
Yeah.
And my mother is a Southern belle, was a Southern belle. And so, but I had to be heard.
Yeah. That's, and by the way, then you get into these situations where you have other forums where employees, former and otherwise, are expressing all kinds of opinions. And some of those you have to take with a grain of salt as well, because now you have an employee that sometimes was not involved in the process as much, did not have certain information, and is sort of unloading against an organization because they were dissatisfied when they left. A lot of their information comes from not having information, and their perspective, sometimes comes from not having it. And so you have this range of things, of information that you're trying to sift through to work through a relationship, and it's very difficult to do, because when you look at those kinds of online forums and you're trying to judge yourself as an employer, it's difficult to do because you just don't know where that perspective is that's being expressed on that forum either. So all of these things that are sort of coming at you as an employer, come at you with these filters that may not provide you with proper input.
When I conduct investigations, and God knows I've done a lot, I tell the person I'm interviewing, it's important that you be honest and truthful. If you fail to do so, it could jeopardize your continued employment. I will not disclose what you say or give you or attribute it to you unless there is some detriment to the company, criminal liability or something like that. Other than that, just for the sake of this investigation, your identity will not be disclosed unless there's some legal issue. And that's worked. If people would come to me and tell me stuff, and I mean, seriously, you have no idea what I hear. But it works too. It's my reputation. I'm very ethical. If I give my word, I'm keeping my word. But I'm also not going to jeopardize a client's reputation or well-being. I'm not making a commitment that I can't keep, in other words.
Yes, and you also, the way you described it, you're building a lot of trust with someone so that they feel comfortable that when they disclose something to you, it stays between you, and it's for a very specific purpose, that it's not going to be used for other purposes. And so building that trust is incredibly important. It sounds like is exactly what you're doing in that scenario.
I mean, there was a situation where the information that came to me had, catastrophic implications organizationally, to me personally, because if I didn't handle it well, could have been a problem. So, I called the person. I said, let's meet. I need to talk to you. And then after I talked to him, I said, and you know what? You need to do this so I don't have to. Because if you don't do it and I have to, it's going to be ugly. And it worked. it really worked. I was grateful because I didn't really want to have to do what I would have had to do.
Yeah, sometimes it does. It also does take that kind of providing some sort of motivation to the person to go and take care of something. You know, again, it just it's that additional thing of, okay, you got to go handle this, you got to go do this, and giving them the motivation, and sometimes frankly you're giving them the backbone to do it.
Uh,
Sometimes you're giving them the courage to do it, right?
yeah,
And sometimes you're providing them with the confidence they need too. It's not just putting the person in a place where either you do it or I do it, right? Sometimes you're saying, no, no, this is the right thing to do, you should
right.
be doing this, and
It's
giving
going
them
to
that,
come out. It's going
right?
to come out. You want to
Yeah,
get in front of it.
yeah. And putting that in front of them and saying, this is going to happen, and it's best if it gets handled this way or the other way. And you're
Yes.
providing them with a roadmap, you're providing them with the confidence, and you're telling them, realistically how they should be thinking about it. That's also important motivating factors in order to get people to do the right thing.
No, it's important. What advice before we end this? Because I'm taking more of your time than I planned. But before we end, do you have any advice for budding entrepreneurs?
You know, Several things. One is just, it's a Nike stole this from me. No, I did. No, they didn't. But I mean, just go do it. At some point, you got to pull the trigger and go do it. If you're going to go start your own business, you got to go do it. And a lot of times I see people that don't take that step, and I'll say to them, well, you have the best business that never took off, right? That's what you have. And sometimes I tell them this. I say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I love this statement because a lot of times what you're trying to do is just protect everything and make sure everything is absolutely perfect, and you never end up doing anything. In that situation, you're letting that perfect be the enemy of actually doing something well and actually doing something. Okay. Number two, I always tell people, listen, this is hard work, and you don't just go put up a shingle and do your thing. That's not, sure, you can be successful if you did that, and lots of people have, but you can also buy the lottery and win, buy a lottery ticket and win. The chances are very little. So what you need to do is find out what exactly is the industry that you're in and be very clear about it, and study that industry, understand your competitors, understand your customer, who it is you're actually selling to, and then go about doing things. Number three, and this is incredibly important in my mind, I always say this: look, your product is not your business. Your business is your product. Okay. Now, your product, what you sell, whether it's whatever widget you're selling, you want to be selling food products, whatever it is, those are products you sell. Those are not your business. And a lot of times, I give an example of professionals when I talk about this, like doctors or lawyers. When you go to a doctor or lawyer, you say, well, what is your business? Well, my business is making patients well, or my business is representing clients. No, that's the product. That's the service you provide. That is not your business. Your business is everything you do, how you interact with clients, what your customer service is like, what your staff is dealing with, how you get patients or clients. All of it is your business. And and here's where you kind of take it for full circle. If you're running a store, yeah, you sell all these products, right? Your business of doing all that your entire shop is the product you're providing to the world. Okay. That's a product you're providing to the world. Keep that in mind. It goes from your customer service, the way you deal with your returns, the way you deal with, the product you're selling, how you sell it, how you package it, how you price it, all of those things, how you deal with your employees, how they deal with the outside world. All of that is your product. So your business is your product. That's what you're giving to the world. That's the entire package that they're paying for. And you can see this all over the place. You may go to a restaurant and you say, the food here is not that great, but geez, you can't even, get a reservation here or find yourself through the door because it's packed all the time. Why? And everyone's had that experience. The
Yeah.
reason is that they realize everything you do. Yes, you go to restaurants to eat, and food is a product you sell in restaurants. And that's what customers pay for specifically, right? but they go to restaurants for different reasons. And restaurants that get that end up having the best business. So that entire restaurant is the product. And so those are three things I would tell people. There's many others if I sat here and thought, but I won't bore you with them.
No, I haven't been bored, and I'm sure our listeners haven't been bored either. But I really appreciate you making yourself available and on really within a short period of time. As an entrepreneur myself who didn't do the things you suggested doing, I'm going to listen to this again because there's information there that I know will be helpful to me.
Well, anytime. I really appreciate you having me on. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. Thank you very much. I'm happy to talk to you whenever you want. And it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Shawn, thank you. And I look forward to talking to you again. Anytime that you feel you have something that you think would be helpful to people, entrepreneurs, or any other aspect of employment, please, you can get in touch with me. I want to make sure that people have access to information. And on this platform, it's free information that will be helpful to them.
Fantastic. I will do that.
Thank you so much. Until next time. Thanks for listening to Your Employment Matters with Beverly Williams. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. I truly appreciate your support, and that helps other listeners find the podcast. If you have a comment, question, or suggestion, you can reach me at bawilliams@youremploymentmatters.com. My book, Get the Job Done, is available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Please join me again next week. Until then, remember to embrace change and differences.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.